Welcome back to Velshi Ruhle. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is facing criticism that big tech companies have to be held accountable for misinformation and propaganda on their platforms. Zuckerberg gave a speech at Georgetown University defending Facebook's practices, painting his network as an arbiter of free speech.
We can either continue to stand for free expression, understanding its messiness, but believing that the long journey towards greater progress requires confronting ideas that challenge us. Or we can decide that the cost is simply too great. And I'm here today because I believe that we must continue to stand for free expression.
Joining me now is Facebook Vice President of Global Affairs and Communications, Nick Clegg. Nick, thank you for joining me. Mark Zuckerberg clearly saying what Facebook stands for is the celebration of freedom of speech. Does it not seem disingenuous, since from a business perspective, Facebook has spent the last 12 years aggressively trying to do business in China?
I think Mark Zuckerberg in his speech yesterday was quite open that he did want Facebook and Facebook services to be available to folk in China. Tried very hard to do that, looked at all sorts of different ways to make that possible. In the end, it was not possible. The Chinese authorities...
But it wasn't Facebook's doing. It was China who wouldn't let you in. So can you be the voice of free speech and trying to do business in a nation that would never allow it? Facebook didn't decide to leave China. China said no way.
Correct. That's right. Exactly. And I think the point that Mark Zuckerberg was making was that particularly in recent times, it has become increasingly clear that China is developing a completely different approach to the internet based on totally different values, basically creating its own sort of closed internet based on heavy control and surveillance of what people do on the internet. And of course, you're seeing Chinese social media app services like TikTok that are increasing their presence in other parts of the world, so that the kind of division, if you like, or the difference between the values that drive an American-style internet, an open global internet based on the values of free expression, and a Chinese-style internet have become starkly clearer over time. And that's why he says that the fact, yes, he was keen that Facebook should be present in China at one point, but since it wasn't possible, and since now it is so obvious that those two sets of values are very, very different, in many ways opposed to each other, he is speaking out more clearly about the virtues of keeping an open global internet as it is, based on strong American free expression values.
Are the values or practices different when they relate specifically to Mark Zuckerberg? Yesterday, when he gave those remarks, the student journalists in the room were not allowed to ask him any questions.
I mean, I wasn't there, but my understanding is that it was Georgetown University.
It's been reported by the AP,
yeah, sure.
So you could be there, and I wasn't there either, but I know it's been reported.
Sure. Well, let me comment on what was reported. I think the way in which the questions were gathered from students, that they write down the questions, they hand them in, and then they're picked by someone from Georgetown University, is something that the university itself had decided upon. It wasn't a Facebook decision, and indeed the way in which they selected the questions was left to the university as well. Yes,
of course, but you do understand how that would benefit Mark Zuckerberg. The way it should work, Mark Zuckerberg gives a speech, you hear what he has to say, and then based on those remarks, you then ask him questions. If people write down their questions before, they have no idea what he's going to say, and then Mr. Zuckerberg and or your communications team can cherry pick said questions so he can answer whatever the heck he wants.
So that's not the way that the practice at Georgetown University works. It doesn't, by the way, from my experience, work in many places, that if you have a large crowd, instead of just everybody having, everybody sort of shouting over each other after the speech, you get people to submit their questions. But listen, it's not as if Mark Zuckerberg has gone into hiding. He's done a number of interviews where people have asked him very challenging questions about what was in his speech. So I don't think, whatever you might say about Mark Zuckerberg, for or against, it's not as if this speech has not been well scrutinised, criticised, analysed, and it's certainly not as if he hasn't been questioned by folk very extensively on it.
One of the people criticizing or scrutinizing is a fellow Silicon Valley CEO founder, Mark Benioff of Salesforce, who has said enough is enough. He said a year ago he likened Facebook to the new cigarettes. But whether it's Facebook, Amazon, Google at this point, Benioff is saying, get real. You are not just a platform, you're a publisher, and you need to be regulated and treated as a publisher, just like any magazine, newspaper, or us right here at NBC.
So I think it is right to say that there need to be new rules of the road, and there does need to be new regulation. And whether it's lawmakers in DC or in Brussels or elsewhere, I think it's fairly obvious that given that this is still it's a huge industry, but it's a young industry. Facebook's only a decade and a half old. It's clear that whether it's on privacy legislation, whether it's on the rules that prevail at the time elections, whether it's on how people can move their data, their personal data from one service to another, whether it's rules about what is and what is not acceptable on our platforms, because that in itself is something where people have, ferocious arguments in different countries, depending on your ideological standpoint. On all of those issues, we agree at Facebook it'd be much better if we could, particularly in the kind of democratic countries in Europe and North America, come up with rules which all big players, Facebook included, have to abide by. I think where we kind of disagree is that regulation is the way forward. We don't think some of these difficult questions about what is and what is not acceptable, about privacy, about how you keep data safe, how you protect our elections, are answered by simply breaking up Amazon, Google, Facebook, and so on. That doesn't really deal with those issues. So regulation, yes. Break up, no, is kind of the view that we take. And to the extent that Mark Benioff was saying that regulation is needed, I think that's something that many people, including folk here at Facebook, would agree with. So you spend tens of millions of dollars on lobbying in D.C. What is it that you think that lawmakers should do? Mark Benioff specifically thinks that 230 should be done away with. That's what protects platforms like yours to not have to adhere to the same rules that we do. Do you think 230 should be taken away? Because Mark does. Sure. No, so I don't think many folk in the kind of tech sector wouldn't agree that just taking away 230. And for those viewers who don't know what 230 is, it does mean that companies like Facebook are not liable for what individual folk post on our services. And to that extent, of course, Facebook and social media companies generally are not like newspapers or other publishers. Mark Zuckerberg is not an editor. He doesn't say, I want this content to be published on that day, because the whole point about social media is it's people spontaneously expressing what they want to themselves, to their family, to their friends, to their communities, and so on. But crucially, 230 also is the legal basis upon which... But you do edit some, sir. Which I was just going to come to, and that is exactly what 230 also allows us to do. It's very important. I think many people forget that what Section 230 allows companies like Facebook to do is exactly take action against hate speech, incitement to violence, voter suppression and intimidation, content that we absolutely do not want on our platforms, and where, in some areas, for instance, terrorist-related content, we've become increasingly successful. About 99% of ISIS, Daesh-related terrorist material is now removed, not least by automated systems here in Facebook, before anyone reports it. So that is also something which Section 230 allows us to do, is yes, give people the freedom to, broadly speaking, say what they want when they want, but also it allows us to put kind of guardrails and boundaries to what can be circulated on our apps and our services. Nick, a colleague of mine, Ben Collins, who focuses on the dark web, found this. The comments on the Facebook live stream of Mr. Zuckerberg's speech were overwhelmingly positive, and a lot of the comments used very similar, very strange language. Facebook communications team, your team, said that you were not moderating comments. So if you weren't moderating the comments, what's going on here? Is that a glitch? Of course, I have absolutely no idea who and why people would generate those comments. As you know, there is a sort of ranking system, so that the way in which things are surfaced are ranked according to all sorts of different signals. But that's done in an automated way, and it certainly wasn't tailored for Mark Zuckerberg's speech. That I can certainly reassure you. I want to share a comment that we saw after the speech. In response, Bernice King, the daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., she posted a photo of her father moments after being fatally shot, and she wrote this. I heard Mark Zuckerberg's free expression speech in which he referenced my father. I'd like to help Facebook better understand the challenges MLK faced from disinformation campaigns launched by politicians. These campaigns created an atmosphere for his assassination.
Bernice King sees her father as an example of how disinformation from politicians, especially when targeted at a specific person, can have deadly consequences. What is your response to her?
Well, obviously, we hugely respect both Bernice King and what she says. And in fact, she will be here at Facebook speaking to Sheryl Sandberg and employees next week. And we really look forward to listening, understanding and learning more from her. All I would say is I think what her comment does reveal, setting aside the specific circumstances around her father, is that, of course, that politicians or indeed people generally say vile things, say untrue things, is something which, of course, well preceded the advent of social media. The question we face today, and of course Facebook was not around at that time, and in a sense that politicians, certainly in election time, think that the other side is not being honest or straightforward about them, is as old as the hills. The question I think we face today is, would it be appropriate as a matter of principle for a private company like Facebook, a private company, by the way, that many people think has too much power already, to exert huge power in adjudicating what politicians can and cannot say? And as a matter of principle, as Mark Zuckerberg explained yesterday, we believe it's not appropriate for a private company to censor political speech from politicians. Doesn't mean there's a free-for-all. Of course not. Politicians can't use ads which break our community standards as far as hate speech is concerned. It doesn't affect our approach to voter suppression and intimidation and making sure that doesn't happen on our platforms. They can't share links, video links that have been previously debunked. So it's not a free-for-all. But I think there is this really important issue of principle, which, in a sense, is not precisely, of course, what Bernice King was referring to, because Facebook was not around back then. But in the modern day, and given, of course, that the political debate is always angry, aggressive, and politicians say half-truths, exaggerations, mischaracterization of each other's values, policies, background, character, and so on, is it Facebook that people want as a private company to step in as a kind of referee, an umpire, adjudicating exactly what politicians can and cannot say about each other? And we believe, as a matter of principle, that's not the right role for a private company.
All right, then, Nick, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your thoughts regarding Mark Zuckerberg's speech on freedom of speech just yesterday. Thanks, Nick. All right, joining me now for reaction, CNBC editor-at-large John Harwood and Politico's chief economic correspondent Ben White. I wish you could see Ben's sneakers today. They are Friday shoes. All right, gentlemen, what do you think? John?
Well, look, the issue is not necessarily about the battle of ideas that Mark Zuckerberg mentioned at Georgetown. The issue is lies. And so Russian intelligence is not putting stuff on Facebook and didn't put stuff on Facebook in 2016 as part of the competition for ideas. It was part of an attack on the United States. And so the question and the challenge for all of us, not just tech companies like Facebook, but those of us in journalism as well, are to make qualitative judgments and recognize the difference between what's true and what's not true, what's malicious and what's well-intended. It's hard. It's a slippery slope. It's very difficult. But that's a challenge that all of us need to step up to.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with John about that. I mean, the extent to which, Nick can say this and Mark Zuckerberg can say this, that he doesn't want to be a publisher, he doesn't want to be an arbiter of what's true and false, it doesn't matter. Facebook is a publisher. They are the source of an enormous amount of news that Americans consume. That's how a lot of people get their news. And as happened in 2016, they get a lot of fake news that way, a lot of misinformation that way, and it impacts our democracy, impacts the results of elections. They have to take that responsibility, whether they want it or not, or we're going to run into the same thing in 2020. So they can spend all the money they want on lobbyists. They can make these arguments about how Facebook isn't a publisher and doesn't want to be an arbiter of right or wrong. But the fact is, the world we live in is where Facebook is providing a lot of people information, needs to be monitored by Facebook. And if there are outright lies and things that are disinformation campaigns by foreign governments, Facebook has a responsibility to get rid of them. Congress, at this point, has a responsibility to force them to do that.
And Steph, when Nick Clegg says, do you really want a private company that some people think is too powerful to exercise that power? not exercising judgment is also an exercise of power. Right. They are a massive platform. And if they are becoming the conduit for hostile foreign intelligence services, which is what we saw happen in 2016, that's dangerous for our country.
Are people buying this argument anymore that he made where he said, listen, Facebook is a new company, we're a young company? Yep, I hear you. They're a company that makes $110 million every ding-dong day.
Yeah. It's ridiculous, the idea that there's some new player, there's some new thing on the horizon, and just a startup in Silicon Valley or whatever. They are a behemoth, one of the biggest, most profitable companies in the world, one of the biggest disseminators of news in the world. So forget about all of that this shouldn't apply to them because it might somehow hinder the growth and the development of the internet. They need to play by the rules of publishers. They have the responsibility of a publisher, and they have the responsibility to not disinform the American public and undermine our democracy. So forget about it. This is a giant company.
I know we have to go then, but then, John, then it's not on Facebook. If they have to follow the rules, they are following the rules right now that are set for them. The rules have to be changed. So it's in the hands of the lawmakers.
Well, right. And Nick Clegg said, regulation, yes, we're open to that. But as I said, it is a challenge that goes beyond tech companies. If we watch President Trump say something at the White House, which is obviously ridiculous, we as journalists have a choice between saying, well, President Trump said this, somebody else said that, they're having an argument, or we can say what he just said was ridiculous. And that is not an easy thing to do. And it's as I said, it's a slippery slope when you get to claims and counterclaims. But sometimes we can tell that 2 + 2 does not equal 5, and we need to say so. And so Facebook has that responsibility as well.
They can say they want regulation. Well, they're invited to be regulated just like us.
Yeah. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.